India become the 33rd country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage? Well, hopes rose today as the Supreme Court is set to take this decision into its own hands. Quite literally, the Chief Justice is spearheading this intervention. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, this very special broadcast, which has a lot of meaning for me because I still remember the times when we had to campaign to decriminalize homosexuality in India. Today, we are focusing on a clutch of petitions before the Supreme Court that are asking for the legalization of same sex marriage. The Chief Justice, Justice Chandrachud, has in fact asked that all pending petitions from all the high courts be transferred to the Supreme Court, where they will be heard together. And it isn't any indefinite delay either. These petitions are next going to be heard in early March. If the court does decide to go the way of legalizing same-sex marriage, then India will become the 33rd country in the world to have done so. It's hard to remember that there was a time just a few years ago when on programs like this one, we were still signing petitions and advocating for the decriminalization of homosexuality. Of course, in many countries, the change has come by legislation, but in this case, the petitioners, many of them couples who have knocked on the doors of the court, are looking for the court to actually lead the way. On the program today, we have three very, very special guests to talk about what could be an epochal moment both in India's social and legal history. Let's introduce them now on the program. If we can bring up our guests, there they are. I'm joined by Niharika Karanjawala. Niharika, of course, is one of the main lawyers who is spearheading this advocacy for equality, for true equality. I think we should call it India's tryst with diversity. There was India's tryst with destiny, and now we have India's tryst with diversity. Also joining us is Udit Sood. Udit is somebody we have woken up, literally, I think, in the middle of his night in San Francisco. And Udit, it's great to have you on the program, and thanks for being a sport about it. And also joining us is Saattvic, who's here in India and is also one of the petitioners. So thank you so much. And I'm so excited in a sense about this moment. So I can't even imagine what all of you are thinking. Because Niharika, who insists on calling me auntie, and I made it a condition that she can't call me auntie on this program. But yes, Niharika, I am old enough to remember that when I was starting out in journalism, homosexuality was a crime in India. And I remember interviewing Vikram Seth, who came on one of my shows, and he was one of the few people to come out and say, look, I'm gay, or I'm at least partially gay, because he identified as bisexual. And we ran a series of advocacy programs just to decriminalize homosexuality. We've come a long way from there. Do you believe the courts are going to listen to this with an empathetic mind? How significant is it, Niharika, that the Chief Justice has transferred all of the petitions, in a sense, to the Supreme Court? Niharika?
So we were very happy, of course, that the Learned Court was pleased to transfer all of the decisions to the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court is dealing with the question at this point of time. So it'll decide the matter once and for all, rather than various high courts giving their opinions on it. And as you said, it's certainly an extremely significant moment, as it shows how far we have come. And in relatively few years, how far we've come, and to a progressive standpoint, and we are certainly very, very hopeful that we will get relief in this matter as well, as we consider this to be of fundamental rights and fundamental importance.
And, I want to bring in the petitioners now. There'll be all kinds of legal questions, but really, this is a personal fight for so many people, so many of parents, of partners, of men and women. And I want to start with you, Udit. I have a question on my live stream that actually says, why marry? Enter a civil partnership. Marriage has religious connotations with personal laws and are often driven by religious diktats. And I think it's an interesting question because heterosexual relationships are moving, at least in our generation and younger, towards live-in partnerships, towards civil partnerships, questioning, in a sense, the institution of marriage. I think it's very important for the audience to understand, the broader audience to understand, Udit, why this is so important to all of you. Udit, go ahead.
Of course. Thanks for the question, Barkha, and thanks for having us on. I think it's critical for the Supreme Court to say that gay relationships, queer relationships stand on an equal footing, not different footing than heterosexual relationships. And so while I understand the argument that marriage has historically had religious connotations, our case focuses on the Special Marriage Act, which is a secular act intended to be sort of separate from custom and religion and all of those things. It's meant to be available to any two persons. And we think that until the Supreme Court recognizes that our relationships are no different, are not inferior in any respect to heterosexual relationships, I think that the bullying in schools is going to continue. I think the shame is going to continue. And I don't think that there'll be meaningful change on the ground. It's not just about the benefits associated with marriage. It certainly, that's an important piece of it. But we want marriage. We want nothing different. We want nothing short of that.
Saattvic, talk a little bit about your own sort of need to actually knock on the doors of the Supreme Court, right? What makes you do it? Some might say that in our, let's say, class of relative privilege, I'm sure you live a fulfilling life with your partner. Uh, why do you need the legal thappa? Is it symbolic? Is it that, as Udit says, discrimination will not truly end till there is true and deeper equality?
Thanks for the question, Barkha, and thank you for having me on as well. I think it's important to say, sort of, to preface this by saying that, we understand that marriage might not be for everyone. And so, what we're fighting for is just the option for those that want to marry to get married. Personally, I do come from a certain amount of privilege. However, it sort of kind of blew up in my face when Gaurav and I were trying to rent an apartment. Try renting an apartment as a gay couple in Mumbai or Delhi, even. We kept getting people telling us that no, we need married couples. We need married couples. The two boys, आप तो bachelor हैं, आप तो लड़कियां लाएंगे, आप पार्टियां करेंगे, हमको ये सब नहीं चाहिए. So it is funny, but it's also sad that
No,
even someone
I'm
with our.
laughing. Sorry. I want to clarify. I'm not laughing because it's funny for you to hear. I'm laughing because I can visualize how it's said. I'm laughing because it's so familiar. I'm laughing because so many Indians, like other people in the world, also want don't ask, don't tell. They don't want to
Mhm.
say it out aloud. They don't want to. I'm laughing just because it's familiar, but it must be terrible, irritating, and infuriating to hear. Of course, Satya.
It was the funny thing happened when the two of us had to go and sort of pose as friends and put up the sort of best acting that I've ever done in my life, and sort of sort of falsify stories and dress up another bedroom so that someone looks like they're sleeping in it. We've had to do all
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and it doesn't feel nice. The reason that I'm doing this is that for me personally, I've migrated to Canada. I'm here on a holiday. I could, we can live a very fulfilling life over there, but we want
Yeah.
to live a very fulfilling life over here. And more than that, I see it as a responsibility to the community as a whole. We, in this position of privilege, can do something about it, and I want to do it for the people who can't. I'm doing it for the people like Gaurav who grew up in small villages in rural India, where the
Gaurav is your
concept.
partner.
Gaurav
Gaurav
is
is your
my partner.
partner. Yes.
Yes, and there the concept of homosexuality doesn't register in people's minds even today. We're doing it for those kids that grow up in environments where they don't have role models, they don't have support. Then, in my eyes, the least that we can give them is the law.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that both you and Udit are linking this to the fact that the law may have changed, but society is slower to change, and so it's very important that the law at all times is well ahead of society. And Udit, I want to you to join the dots a little bit before I go back to Niharika to what you spoke about the school bullying, the fact that it's still tough to rent an apartment, the fact that in rambling big Indian families, this is still something that your parents, not your parents in particular, that parents in general may want you to shush up about. भाई लोगों को बताने की क्या जरूरत है? Why do you have to tell people? जियो ना अपनी जिंदगी, live it quietly. Udit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the shame is certainly what we're fighting against. It's like I said, until it's not enough to say that you're not criminals, gay people. It's not enough to say theoretically that you're entitled to all the same rights as heterosexuals, because we're seeing what happens when you come forward and say, all right, Supreme Court, you've said we have all the same rights. We want to exercise this particular right of getting married that everybody else gets. And then we hear the opposition from the other side that, well, Indian society is just not ready. And on that point, I don't understand that argument, because for me, my story has been, when I was in law school at NUJS Calcutta, I made friends with people from all backgrounds, all economic and geographical backgrounds, family backgrounds, and I now have an army of people who are supportive. My
Yeah.
parents have always been supportive. Niharika, who's one of my closest childhood friends, has always been supportive. And so the notion that, like, India is not ready, I don't think a government of the day should get to say how we think and what we feel and what our culture is. I don't think that's right.
Niharika, I want to ask you two things. One is there are very serious legal reasons for why somebody may choose to get married, in the same way that heterosexual couples, for example, worry. Suppose something happens to me. What happens after me? There is shared property, there are other shared projects. Then there's the question of children. We haven't even spoken about this. The fact is that in India, for a single man to have a child via surrogacy or adoption is very, very difficult. So there are actual, real, legal, practical reasons that impact people's life, for which actually marriage is necessary. Even today, marriage is necessary. Can you speak a little bit about this, Niharika?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought this up, Barkha, because it's not just, it's not, as Udit and Saattvic both said, it's not just a theoretical question of rights. And it's not just a question of, oh, you can be together, nobody's bothered, live your life. On a very serious day-to-day basis, there are a lot of issues that you encounter. Like, for example, something as simple as not being able to share a bank account with your spouse, something as simple as having to jump through hoops and having to sort of create a plethora of lies when you're trying to rent an apartment, having to pretend like somebody is sleeping in the other room when the landlord is, if the landlord is coming by, day-to-day things. And as we're coming out of a pandemic, as you mentioned, serious issues such as end of life decisions. And I think coming out of a pandemic, this has resonated with everybody much more than it would otherwise. In circumstances where you can't see your partner unless you are a relative, and unless you can prove that you are a relative, you have the inability to make end of life decisions for them. You have the inability to even maybe see them for the last time, right? These are very serious things that impact people. And as you mentioned, the issue of children. One set of our petitioners have kids, and for them, again, it becomes very difficult dealing day to day, having to explain if you have any documentation made for the children, having to explain the labyrinth of that, the fact that only one parent can be on all of the children's paperwork. It becomes a very serious day to day problem, which is why giving the option for marriage, and Satvik rightly said, marriage might not be for everyone. Heterosexual couples may decide just to have a domestic union and not marry, and homosexual couples may decide to as well, even if the right is granted. However, the question of that right is of immense significance.
And that's such a great point. I'm thinking, imagine like in hospitals, people say, okay, your next of kin has to take a decision for you. And what if your next of kin, so to speak, your chosen next of kin is your partner? At the moment, without
Absolutely.
that legal recognition, they can't do that.
And the fact of the matter is, Barkha, while we fortunately, like you said, we come from backgrounds of considerable privilege. So a lot of the people we know and a lot of the people that you'll deal with and speak to in interviews have families that are supportive of them, touch wood, which is a great thing. But a lot of people get turned out by their families once they find out, once they come forward with their truth. For a lot of people, if you choose to be in a same-sex partnership, then that partner is all of the family that you have, which means if God forbid, in a situation where a next of kin or someone has to take a decision for you, the only person there for you and available for you will be your partner. And then in those circumstances, to completely disregard that, I think that's a situation anyone can empathize with.
Satvik, I want you to, you mentioned about how tough it is, how much of a pretense one has to go through to even today rent a house, even though homosexuality is perfectly decriminalized and legal today. Where do you join the dots between this fight for same sex marriage and the kind of continued social discrimination, economic discrimination. Let's also talk about getting hired. Our companies talk about diversity, but are they really as inclusive as they pay lip service to? Join those dots for us, Satvik.
Well, there's two issues here, Barkha. I think that making so legality is in some sense an indicator of sort of morality to the country. Making something legal sort of subconsciously tells people, you know what, it's not against the law, it's fine by the law, so it's okay to some degree. So in my head, the law almost leads sort of social opinion on a subject, not the other way around. And the second thing that you mentioned was this issue of economic loss. Now, our petition is four of us, and all four of us have either left the country or are in sort of plan or are planning to leave the country because we don't have the right to marry in this country. Now, I'm an economist, and we can share our petition with you. We've included a lot of material on how exactly denying same-sex marriage has economic costs, not just for gay people, but for the country as a whole. Now, there was a World Bank study that estimated that India might be losing up to 1.3% of its GDP solely because of lost hours and lost work hours by LGBTQ people on account of only three things: increased depression, increased suicide, and HIV. Just these three things might be accounting for 1.3% of GDP. You add to that the fact that on average, when gay people or LGBT people are included in the workforce, they're less productive because of all the social pressures. You take away another 0.4%. And there's studies which have documented that many people leave India just like us because of the denial of equal rights. There was a study, not in India, but in Hong Kong, where also you don't have the right to same sex marriage, where over half the gay men that were interviewed wanted to leave, and over 90% of the people that wanted to leave were doing so because they couldn't get married. It keeps away foreign investment. There's multiple associations between how accepting you are of the LGBTQ community and how innovative you are. The number of Fortune 500 companies, per capita GDP, rates of innovation, urbanization, everything. And the cumulative effect of all this can actually be quite large. On average, countries that allow gay people, LGBTQ people, the right to get married have between 54 and 64% higher per capita GDP in the long term than countries that don't. So, this idea that this is only a problem for people like me is patently incorrect. There are, we bear the highest burden, but there are significant effects on the country as a whole.
Those are absolutely compelling statistics, and I'm glad you shared them. That the hit and the knock is not just to the people who are unable to access this equality in the truest sense, but also to the country itself. Udit, you are in the U.S., where same-sex marriage, has been in the headlines quite recently, and the question is, all of you have gone the legal route. And I'm quite intrigued by Saatvik suggesting that so many of the petitioners think of living outside. One of their reasons is they can't live the life they want to in their home country. So speak a bit about that. I think you have a partner who's not Indian, if I'm not wrong. And for you, therefore, to come to India suddenly with your partner who's then not recognized as your husband right now, at least, that must be really weird.
It is weird, and it is one of the reasons that he's made no trips to India yet. We just don't know yet how to navigate that. Um, but as Satvik has been saying, I now lead this fulfilling life in San Francisco. It's one of the most accepting liberal places on the planet, and so I don't have any complaints about my life on a day-to-day basis. But the harm is already done. um, Nobody should be forced to choose between their home where they grew up, where their families are, where they obtained all of their education, and their partner. Like, that's just not a fair choice to impose on anybody. And the fact that we continue to do that among Indian people, keep in mind that the majority of people who are able to leave the country are people who are exceedingly qualified, who have qualifications that can compete with labor at a global level. And so the loss to India as a whole, as Saatvic's been saying, could potentially be staggering.
Yeah, and just to not be able to come home with your husband and have to say that he's someone else, I mean, I think that's just bizarre.
It's just not
Niharika,
tenable.
it's not tenable. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Niharika, I'm going to give you the last word. Many of the countries that have legalized same sex marriage, and by the way, there are many countries in the world that have not. So if India does this, it really will be joining the ranks of a proud, progressive country. And so, therefore, I very much hope this happens. Uh, you guys have gone the legal route. Right, you haven't gone the legislative route. A number of other countries have gone the legislative route. Why are you hoping that the courts will act quicker than Parliament? Is it because politics is kept out of it? That's question one. Question two: the Chief Justice himself, one of his seminal judgments has been right to privacy, and to not have the state kind of interceding in what you do. And he's a big champion of individual liberty. Are you hopeful? And not to prejudge the judge, but are you hopeful?
We are certainly very hopeful. We have a lot of faith in the judiciary on this. The legislative route, as you said, is complicated for a number of reasons. One, politics not being least among them, but we feel strongly that this is an issue of constitutional rights, of fundamental rights, and as such, it is the right venue we feel is the court to reinforce this, as this is a question of interpretation of rights more than anything else.
Well, I'm going to say thank you and more power to all three of you and to your partners, to Saattvic, to Udit, to Niharika for fighting the good fight, and to everyone else who's in court. There's a whole clutch of petitions there. As I said, I'm old enough to remember the time when we didn't think that gay rights would be decriminalized, and we stand at the precipice of big and significant change. And I'm very hopeful, actually, that this will come from the court, and we can soon meet Saattvic and his husband, and Udit and his husband, and that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And much love and more power to all of you. Thank you for joining us and to our audience. See you soon. Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.